In a land where the cold is unforgiving and the wind seemed to sing ancient legends, a village stood hidden between mountains of ice and dense forests of pine trees. Here, nature reigned untamed, shaping not only the land but also the hearts and souls of those who dared to call it home. The houses were made of sturdy wood, with sloping roofs that withstood the incessant snow, while the smoke from the fireplaces rose in spirals, like a breath of life amid the harshness of winter. It was a place where every shadow carried a story, and every corner echoed with the memories of battles fought against the unknown. The people who inhabited this village were as resilient as the ice beneath their feet. Men and women worked side by side, forging weapons, tanning hides, and preparing the food that would sustain their families during the cruelest months. There was no room for weakness. Survival depended on collective strength and wisdom passed down through generations. And yet, there was a curious harmony in the brutality of everyday life. The children played under the watchful eye of the elders, who told stories about heroes of the past and creatures that inhabited the depths of the forest. The forest, in fact, was both a source of sustenance and a threat. With its immense trees and the silence that seemed to breathe, it offered plentiful game, but hid dangers that only the bravest dared to face. The village hunters were revered, almost mythical, because they knew how to read the signs of nature and face beasts that would make even the bravest hesitate. And it was precisely in the depths of this forest that, every now and then, something would appear to test not only the courage, but the essence of those who had the audacity to venture beyond the known trails. Among the stories whispered around the fireplaces, there was a name that aroused admiration and, in some, even a touch of envy: Einar, the hunter of the East. He was a man of imposing presence, with eyes that seemed to capture every movement around him, and a posture that betrayed years of living in the forest. He was not the oldest, nor the strongest in the village, but there was something in the way he walked, an almost silent confidence, as if he were an extension of the land he walked on. It was said that he was blessed by the gods, although Einar always refuted such an idea with a discreet smile. His fame as a hunter came from feats that bordered on the unbelievable. While others avoided the most remote territories of the forest, Einar faced them with ease. He was the one who brought meat in times of scarcity, who recovered valuable furs when everyone else gave up, and who seemed to understand nature in a way that no one else could. The younger ones watched him with keen eyes, hoping to pick up on some secret or trick that would explain his skill. But Einar never boasted. For him, the forest was not an enemy to be defeated, but an ally to be respected. Despite his reputation, Einar was a simple man. He preferred the silence of the forest to the hustle and bustle of the village, and his home, a modest cabin on the eastern edge, reflected his life, practical and functional. He did not seek recognition, but the village depended on him more than he cared to admit. Einar knew that danger was constantly lurking, and not just for him. Every step in the snow could be an invitation to something darker, something that even he was not prepared to face. Einar, the hunter of the East, was not born to great acclaim or glorious omens. He was the youngest son of a blacksmith and a tanner, raised in a modest hut on the edge of town. From an early age, his childhood was marked by a sense of curiosity that challenged the limits of his parents' patience. While other children played around the houses, Einar would venture into the forest, fascinated by the sounds and secrets it held. He had a habit of collecting feathers, shells, and even small bones, which he carefully organized as if they were treasures. But that innocent curiosity would soon turn into something deeper, a need to understand the world around him. As a teenager, life showed its harshest side. A cruel plague struck the village, taking many, including Einar's older brother, who had been the pride of the family. It was at this time that Einar began to shape the quiet strength that would accompany him throughout his life. With his brother gone, He took on responsibilities he hadn't expected so soon. He began to learn the skills of his father and mother, but he always returned to the forest, where he found solace and challenge. It was there that he had his first encounter with danger, a hungry wolf that attacked him at nightfall. Armed only with a makeshift spear, Einar managed to survive, but not before leaving a scar on his shoulder that would become one of his most recognizable features. Today, as a grown man, Einar carries the lessons of his childhood and the trials of his youth. He doesn't see life as simple, but as a series of tests imposed by the gods or by nature itself. Although his fame as a hunter has elevated him in the eyes of the village, he knows that each step he takes on the ice could be his last. The lonely nights in the forest bring both reflection and restlessness, and Einar understands that the real battle is not against the beasts, but against the fear that threatens to invade the human heart. He has become what he is through pain and persistence, but the future holds unrest that not even his experience can foresee. Something is approaching, and Einar feels, deep within his being, that the calm that reigns now is only the prelude to the storm. Deep in the thickest forest, where sunlight barely penetrated the intertwined canopy, lived the creatures that the brave few dared to call the Shadow Brothers. This trio of giant brown bears, led by an imposing beast known as Skan, were the terror of the island. Skan, with his colossal build and scars that told tales of countless battles, commanded his two smaller brothers, the quick-tempered Fenrir and Björn, whose cunning made up for what he lacked in brute strength. Together, they were an unstoppable force, driven by hunger and instinct, but also by something that seemed almost strategic. During hunting season, when the forest was alive with activity from both prey and predator, the Shadow Brothers became a constant and devastating presence. They not only attacked with ferocity, but also destroyed the delicate balance of the fauna. Elk and wild boar, which once roamed the forest freely, began to disappear, forcing other predators to migrate or face starvation. Even wolves, known for their combative spirit, avoided crossing the path of the three bears. The trails they followed were marked by broken trees, deep footprints, and the unmistakable smell of fresh blood. The threat posed by the Shadow Brothers was not limited to the forest. The riverbanks, where many animals came to quench their thirst, became death traps. Birds ceased their songs, and silence reigned where there had once been life. It was as if the presence of the three brothers drained the vitality of the environment, leaving a trail of desolation in their wake. And so, even the safest places began to be filled with a feeling of constant alert. The Shadow Brothers were not just bears. They were the very symbol of the chaos in the natural order of the island, a dark reminder that the forest belonged, above all, to the most feared. From the earliest days of his youth, Einar had heard tales of the creatures that haunted the depths of the island. The elders spoke in whispers, as if even mentioning the Shadow Brothers' name would invoke their wrath. Legend held that these bears were no ordinary beasts, but rather marked by the gods in a moment of anger or whim. Skan, the eldest, was said to have been born under an eclipse, with eyes that reflected the fire of the stars and a strength that defied the earth itself. Fenrir, the second, was swift as the wind and capable of delivering blows so devastating that even tree trunks would give way. Björn, the youngest, was described as the most intelligent, with the ability to manipulate situations to always emerge victorious. Together, they were seen as the embodiment of nature at its most savage and unforgiving. Though the stories varied from one teller to the next, there was one common thread that resonated. No one who crossed the path of the Shadow Brothers came away unscathed. It was said that experienced hunters who dared to challenge the trio in search of glory or survival were never seen again. Some suggested that these men were devoured, while others believed that the bears spared them to spread fear, leaving them to live with scars that served as an eternal reminder of their insignificance in the face of the force of nature. To many, these legends were exaggerations or stories created to scare children, but those who knew the forest knew there was some truth to them. Einar, like many others, grew up with these stories engraved in his mind. But unlike others, he did not dismiss them as mere fables. During his hunts, he would observe the marks left on the trees, the tracks that seemed too large for any common animal, and listen for the distant sounds of something moving in the shadows. To him, the Shadow Brothers were more than a myth. They were a reality that needed to be understood before facing. And so, while most avoided the lands that the three dominated, Einar felt that, sooner or later, their paths would cross, not by choice, but by a destiny that seemed already traced by the gods. It was a cold morning. The fog covered the forest like a silent blanket, and Einar knew that it would be a long day. He woke up early, as usual, and began preparing for his hunt. With the first light of day, he got up from his makeshift camp, a shelter made of branches and skins, and went to the small stream to wash his face. The reflection of his tired face was a reminder of endless nights spent in vigil. He looked at the equipment that was laid out around him, a sturdy wooden bow, a hunting knife that was his faithful companion, and some arrows with stone tips. He checked every detail, adjusted the bowstrings and sharpened the knife blades, as he always did before entering the woods. His gaze fixed on the forest in front of him, a vast expanse of trees and shadows, and he took a deep breath, smelling the damp earth and dense vegetation. After a final look around to make sure nothing was out of place, Einar began to make his way through the trees. He wasn't after large game, but he hunted to feed the villagers and, if he was lucky, he might bring back some that would provide good leather for his clothing. The forest seemed alive, full of sounds and movement, the snapping of twigs under the feet of small animals, the distant chirping of birds, and sometimes the rustling of leaves that signaled the passage of something larger. Einar moved with the calm of someone who understood the terrain, knowing every trail, every tree, as if the forest were an extension of himself. The wind was at his back, and he headed toward a valley where he knew elk and wild boar often hung out. When he reached the spot, Einar prepared to make a makeshift camp. He didn't plan to spend much time there, but rather to observe and wait for the right moment to hunt. He built a small fire, not to attract attention, but to warm himself and cook something quick. The smell of roasting meat and the sound of the crackling fire broke the serenity of the forest. Meanwhile, he prepared the environment to set his traps, setting up some of his contraptions, such as nooses made of thin ropes and stake traps. With the fire crackling in the distance, he sat on a log and waited, alert for any movement. The hours passed slowly, and Einar knew that patience was his greatest ally on a hunt like this. However, what seemed to be a peaceful day soon took an unexpected turn. Just as Einar was preparing to check his traps, a strange feeling began to grow in his chest. The wind stopped, the forest fell silent, and for a brief moment, he felt a sudden chill that had no origin in his surroundings. Einar, with his experience, knew something was wrong. His senses were heightened, and the low sound of something moving in the shadows did not go unnoticed. Slowly he stood up, gripping the knife firmly and looking around, trying to identify the source of the threat. It was then that he heard them, the low, almost unmistakable sound of heavy but swift footsteps. Glowing eyes and indescribable ferocity soon appeared in the shadows. A group of wolves, perhaps 5 or 6, were surrounding the camp, their yellow eyes fixed on Einar, and their sharp teeth flashed as they approached. He knew that this was not ordinary prey, but hunters, and now he was the target. The tension in the air was palpable. The sound of the leaves rustling softly seemed now a warning of imminent danger. Einar, with the wolves approaching, knew he could not hesitate. They were moving fast, in a formation that suggested a coordinated attack. Their eyes gleamed in the dim light, while their agile, muscular bodies moved with a precision that challenged any hunter. Einar took a deep breath, feeling the tension take over his body. He remained calm, knowing that the battle for his survival depended on every move he made next. It was not the first time he had faced a relentless enemy, but never these wolves, never this specific hunt. He raised the knife, which now felt heavier in his hand, and positioned himself, keeping his eyes fixed on the leader of the group. The leader, a larger wolf with black fur and intensely yellow eyes, gave the signal for the attack. With a ferocious roar, the first wolf lunged forward, its sharp claws slicing through the air toward Einar's chest. But he was not caught off guard. With a swift leap, he dodged it, feeling the wolf's wind brush against his skin. In a swift movement, the blade of his knife slashed the wolf's flank, forcing it to retreat. But the blood dripping from his own hand made Einar aware of how serious this fight was. The other wolves were quick to act, dividing into two groups. While one of them approached from the right, another tried to surround him from the left. Einar knew he could not be caught between two simultaneous attacks, so with a skill acquired over the years, he used the environment to his advantage. With an unexpected leap backward, he supported himself against a tree, turning his body deftly, dodging another attack. The blade of the knife cut through the air and hit the neck of a wolf that was approaching furiously. The wolf fell with a grunt of pain, but before Einar could recover, he felt a huge weight hit his leg, forcing him to fall to his knees. One of the wolves, faster than he had anticipated, had managed to attack and sink its teeth into his ankle. Einar's pained cry echoed through the forest, but he could not stop. With an immense effort, Einar used his other leg to push the wolf away, freeing himself momentarily. The wolf retreated, but the pain in his leg slowed him down. It was then that the leader, bolder, advanced directly towards him, teeth bared, ready to finish what the others had started. The fight turned into a whirlwind of action, but Einar, with an instinct for survival, grabbed the wolf with his free hand, delivering a fatal blow with his knife to the animal's throat. The leader fell, gasping, and Einar felt relief, but not for long. The rest of the pack still surrounded him, now further away, seeming to hesitate. Finally, after a tense and violent confrontation, the remaining wolves, seeing their leader fall, realized that they were at a disadvantage. Two of them, the weakest, gave Einar one last look before turning and disappearing into the forest, vanishing like shadows in the growing darkness. Einar, exhausted and breathing heavily, fell to his knees on the ground, the pain in his leg still bothering him. He touched the necklace around his neck, a makeshift amulet he had made from the wolf tooth of one of the animals he had hunted earlier. The fight had been hard, and he knew that, even in victory, the damage was deep. The battle had left a scar on his soul as well as on his skin, a scar that would mark the moment he faced death and overcame it. With one last look at the silent forest, where the wolves were now far away, Einar began to walk back to his village. Each step was a reminder of the struggle he had faced and overcome. Even with the pain, with the scar, he knew that he had once again shown the strength of an Eastern hunter. His people awaited him, and the legend of his courage would continue to grow, as would their respect for the forest and its dangers. Einar returned to the village with his leg injured but his indomitable spirit intact. The pain throbbed, but it was a pain he knew well, a pain that did not defeat him, only reminded him of the price of survival. When he entered the village, he was greeted with looks of surprise and concern. The women rushed to help him, while the men watched him, knowing that he had faced something far beyond simple danger. Gathered around a campfire, Einar recounted what had happened. He told them about the wolves, about the fierce fight he had fought, and of course, about the necklace he now wore, a symbol of triumph over adversity. His eyes were tired, but they still reflected the same determination as ever. They were like shadows, Einar said, with a seriousness that made the others fall silent. But there was no shadow big enough to swallow me. Einar's words echoed among the villagers, who knew that once again the hunter from the east had overcome the impossible. The next few days were peaceful, but the village could not relax for long. As the months passed, Einar, despite his recovery, felt a growing uneasiness, as if something was about to happen. He knew that nature followed its own cycle, and that somewhere far away, the three bear brothers were hibernating, gathering strength for what was to come. But this was not spoken of. The villagers kept to their routines, and Einar knew he had to prepare himself, for as always, the calm was only the prelude to another storm. Winter finally gave way to the arrival of an uncertain spring. While Einar's village went about its usual routine, nature around it began to stir. The snow that covered the mountain peaks slowly melted, and the icy winds gave way to a warmer breeze. But with it, something else stirred, something that could not be ignored. It was hunger. In the far reaches of the island, where the cold winds still carried echoes of hibernation, the three bear brothers began to awaken. Their fur, once thick and covered in snow, was now soaked in sweat as the huge animals stretched, emerging from their caves with the slowness of those who had rested for too long. The hunting instinct, weakened by long sleep, soon flared up again. Their sharp claws gleamed, and the roar of Björn, the most cunning of the brothers, echoed across the hills, breaking the silence of the mountain. The hunger was voracious and unstoppable. As the bear brothers separated, each in search of food, Björn, the most cunning, exchanged glances with the others. He smelled the wind and felt something familiar. On the horizon, Björn's eyes, now more alert, focused on a distant speck. A village. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel the presence of small, weak beings, humans. His stomach, empty after months of rest, growled with a primitive hunger. Slowly, he followed the trail of the wind, while Einar's village became clearer as he approached, still camouflaged by the dense vegetation. It was there, in that village, that the next hunt would begin. The sun, which was beginning to hide behind the horizon, cast a golden light over the land, as if to warn that the hunting cycle was about to begin again. And with it came the great threat of Björn, the cunning bear, who was already eyeing Einar's village with great care. Hunger, now more insatiable than ever, burned in the bear's eyes, and the desire to destroy everything in sight became inevitable. The air was heavy with the scent of approaching rain, a thick curtain that obscured the landscape around Einar's village. The winds were now stronger, as if nature itself sensed what was coming. Björn, the cunning bear, walked with silent steps, taking advantage of the dense vegetation to get closer and closer. His brothers had separated, each seeking their own way to satisfy their consuming hunger. But Björn knew what he had to do. He had a clear objective, the village. That was where the real prey was to be found, and with one precise movement, he prepared to attack it alone. His hunting instinct guided him, and he knew that when he arrived, chaos would begin. With his massive feet muffling the sound of his footsteps, Björn reached the outskirts of the village. He could feel the tension in the air, as if the inhabitants were still unaware of the impending danger. It was the perfect time. The bear approached more quickly now, its sharp eyes shining in the dusk darkness. First, he would attack the weakest structures, creating a commotion that would spread fear and confusion. With a single swipe of his claws, he destroyed the fence that surrounded the village, and soon the sound of splintering would spread, causing all the villagers to look in the direction of the crash. Some began to run, while others tried to organize themselves, but Bjorn was already among them. The great bear, with its strength and intelligence, began to attack, knocking down the houses and leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The shouting and chaos took over the village, but Einar, who was in one of the furthest cabins, quickly realized what was happening. He ran to the center of the village, where the sound of combat was already beginning to echo, and saw the gigantic bear destroying everything in front of him. The instinct to protect and the desire to defend his land took over Einar. He knew that if the village was destroyed, his people would be lost. He shouted for the others to move away, and with his sword in hand, he advanced to face the bear. The confrontation between Einar and Bjorn was immediate and violent. The bear growled with a deep sound that reverberated in the earth, while Einar positioned himself, alert to the animal's movements. The bear, with its sharp claws and enormous strength, tried to attack furiously, but Einar, with his agility and cunning, dodged the initial blows. He knew he needed to focus on the bear's weakness, something he had learned to recognize over the years. He used the environment to his advantage, running between the fallen trees and avoiding the animal's direct attacks. However, Bjorn was no fool. The bear adapted quickly, trying to surround Einar in every possible way. In a quick and precise movement, Einar managed to dodge a deadly attack from Bjorn and, with a well-aimed blow, cut the bear's thick hide. The wound made the bear retreat for a moment, but its fury only increased. They continued to exchange blows, each trying to impose himself on the other. Einar felt his body tired, but he could not give up. The village, his home, was at the mercy of that monstrous creature. Bjorn, despite his cunning, could not predict all of Einar's movements, and with one more precise blow, the hunter plunged his sword into the bear's chest. Bjorn, previously so agile, now staggered, and with a final roar of pain, he fell heavily to the ground, the body of the enormous animal finally immobilized. Einar, with a heavy heart from the battle he had just fought, looked at the fallen bear before him. He knew that this victory did not mean the end of the danger, but at least he had saved his village for that moment. With his sword still bloody, he stood up, looking towards the sky, as the last vestiges of the night began to disappear, giving way to a morning that would be marked by the fight, but also by the hope that the threat had finally been defeated. After his victory over Bjorn, Einar felt the weight of the battle settle on his body and mind. The bear lying before him, its large body wounded, was proof of his courage and skill, but also a reminder of what was to come. It wasn't long before the sound of his brother's distant roar reached him, like a wave of fury about to swallow everything he had conquered. He knew that Bjorn's death would not be the end, but only the beginning of something much greater. The other two bears, Fenrir and Skarn, would take revenge with an intensity he could not yet measure. The village was safe for now, but he could not rest. Not while there was a threat to his people. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold and red, as Einar observed Bjorn's body. He knew he had to act quickly. There was no more time to waste. The hunt for the second bear, Fenrir, would be his next mission. Memories of legends told over the years flashed through his mind, but nothing could prepare him for what was to come. Fenrir was not just a bear, but a force of nature, something as immense and destructive as a storm. Einar knew that today's victory, although glorious, was no guarantee if he did not properly prepare for what was to come. He took a deep breath and headed toward the center of the village. With a heavy spirit, Einar retreated to the outskirts of the village, where he prepared his hunting tools with the precision of a true hunter. He sharpened his sword, checked his bow and arrows, and organized the other equipment needed for the journey. There was something about preparation that brought a certain relief. It was time to focus, to put all his experience into practice and do what he knew best: hunt. But this was no ordinary hunt. He no longer hunted just for food or honor, but for the survival of his land, of his people. He knew that if he failed, not only would his life be at risk, but that of everyone around him. Fenrir would not be an easy target. With the provisions ready, Einar quickly said goodbye to the few remaining inhabitants still roaming the village, instructing them to take shelter and prepare for the worst. It would not be easy, but he trusted his people to resist. He knew that the fight for his land was far from over. The cold wind blowing from the mountains indicated that the journey would be arduous and full of dangers. But the determination in his chest allowed no doubt. He would set out in search of Fenrir, and, if necessary, face another deadly battle. It was not the first time that he had found himself alone in the jungle, hunting an enemy that challenged his abilities. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. With a firm step and a determined gaze, Einar walked away from the village and headed towards the unknown lands, where the legend of Fenrir and his brothers would become reality. The hunt was about to continue, and the story was far from over. The mountains before him were dark, as if they knew what was to come. But Einar was prepared to face whatever was necessary, for he knew that the fight for his land, for his life, was not over. And so, with a determined heart, he set out into the unknown, ready to hunt the second bear, on a journey that only destiny could reveal. The story continues. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues.